Coming up next on WNIN Lawmakers, we're joined by Indiana State Senator Mark Messmer to discuss the latest from the Indiana General Assembly. WNIN Lawmakers starts right now. Welcome to WNIN Lawmakers. I'm John Gibson, news manager and local host of WNIN FM's Morning Edition. Before we check in with Senator Messmer, here's a report from Indiana Public Broadcasting's Brandon Smith on what happened at the General Assembly this past week.
The city of Gary filed a lawsuit against gun makers and sellers a quarter of a century ago, arguing their negligence has contributed to the city's gun violence epidemic. That case is still ongoing, but legislation narrowly approved by a Senate committee would end it by saying that no city or town in the state can file a civil lawsuit against anyone in the gun industry, even if they do something illegal. Legislation specifically banning anti-Semitism in higher education underwent an overhaul in a Senate committee. At issue was the bill's definition of anti-Semitism, which referenced a definition from the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. The legislation's new language takes elements from the IHRA definition, but doesn't specifically refer to it. And a measure headed to the Senate floor would temporarily lift the statute of limitations for victims of abuse in an ongoing settlement with the Boy Scouts of America. Without that provision, those victims could get 10 to 25% less money than victims in other states. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
We're joined now by Indiana State Senator Mark Messmer, who represents Crawford, Du Bois, Gibson, Perry, Pike, and Spencer counties. I think you might hold the record there for the most counties, Senator. Thank you
so much. G. Lacey might have a half of one more.
There you go. There you go. That is Senator Mark Messmer. Thank you so much for joining us via Skype from Jasper. Well, let's discuss some of the bills that Brandon just told us about. House Bill 1235 says that only the state can sue gun manufacturers and sellers, not individual cities or towns, even if some laws have been broken. That measure is now headed to the full Senate, where you are. What are your thoughts on that bill?
Well, that as he described, that's been an ongoing lawsuit that I thought we had properly addressed about 10 years ago, but evidently whatever we passed it didn't quite get the job done. I would agree the state should have the only remedy to sue gun manufacturers in a situation like that. It would just keep unlimited amounts of communities for. The gun manufacturers, unless they, they're claiming them to be at fault for the gun violence in their cities, and I don't see how gun manufacturers should be held responsible for, blatant disregard for, criminal law, by gangs and other. Most of the violence on our streets is gang on gang violence, and that doesn't seem reasonable to allow communities to sue cities for behavior of people.
Right. So I assume you're planning to vote for the measure?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to House Bill 1002. We also heard Brandon talking about that in our report. It defines anti-Semitism. It defines anti-Semitism, and it passed the committee this week and is now headed to the full Senate, with some language that was considered controversial removed now. What are your thoughts on this bill and the amendments to it?
Right. Well, we talked about that bill within our caucus, prior to the committee hearing, and the bill had initially referenced, that international standard on anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. But if that standard changed in the future, we may or may not agree with what the standard says down the road. So we copied all of the main elements, of that standard, and put the language of the standard in our code rather than referring, to a federal or international standard. We typically try to avoid referring to federal code sites, or in this case, an international body's site, for a definition. we usually tend to, and at least any bills I've been involved with, take the language of that section and adopt the language. That way we know what the code site refers to, what it says, and if it changes in the future, then we would come back as a body and address those changes.
So you feel this is a measure that will stand the test of time?
Well, it'll probably survive this legislative session, and I think it does move the needle, in the space of anti-Semitism, and really serves as more of a guide document for communities or universities or folks that are wanting to have anti-Semitism policies, and gives them framework that they can work with. I mean, I think that was the original intent of the bill, and really the changes that we made in committee this week were slight nuances to what the bill already set out to do.
Do you yourself feel that anti-Semitism has been on the rise? Is it something that needs to be addressed?
Well, with all of the post-October actions in Israel, there has been a heightened anti-Semitic Semitic movement, and primarily on college campuses, and this does attempt to deal with that ongoing problem and growing problem.
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on to House Bill 1047. It allows victims of abuse to get a larger portion of the Boy Scout settlement. It also expands the current revenge porn law. What are your thoughts on that measure as it heads, again, to the full Senate?
Well, not being on that particular committee and not really having discussed that bill in any of our caucus meetings yet, I would think as a general rule, allowing victims of sex abuse crimes broader access to. As I understood it, there were some people that would have been carved out, exempted from the settlement. And this bill is attempting to deal with folks who in a bigger group would have been otherwise excluded from the financial settlement with the Boy Scouts. And if we're going to go back and try to protect our youth that were abused, it seems like a reasonable change to make.
You say you haven't seen the measure just yet, but you like the
It came
general
out of
idea?
committee, so yeah, it'll be on second reading Monday, and then it would be eligible for final passage on Tuesday.
Yeah, all right, well, we will see how that one progresses. Let's move on to Senate Bill 188. It would reduce the time consumers have to dispute bank charges from 6 years, I guess where it is now, down to 2 years. It has passed the Senate and has passed the committee stage in the Indiana House. What's the reasoning there, and why did you support that measure?
Well, the current statute was 6 years, and probably the right landing spot would be 3 years. That tends to be nobody brought that committee amendment up on our side of the building, but after the bill passed the Senate, it would if there's going to be amendments on it, it would happen probably on the House side and take it to 3 years. I think what ends up is a lot of folks accumulate what they call class action lawsuits for disputes on bank charges, and it would limit the time that folks have the ability to set up a class from 6 years down to 2 currently, and probably 3 by the time the bill is done.
So you'd prefer to see 3 instead of 2 years? Yeah.
Yes.
Why do you think it's important to reduce that? Why should consumers have less time, as you see it?
Well, the current it just stretches out. It ends up being most of the time class action lawsuits that never go to court. They're used by large law firms. They gather folks in a class, and it gives them a longer time to pool up a class, and then it ends up just usually multi-million-dollar settlements against banks to keep from going to court, and all those court costs or settlement fees just end up at the end of the day, they would end up hurting consumers, that they're planning to help by negatively impacting banks and negatively impacting folks' ability to get bank accounts and access to products.
I see. All right, well, let's move on to another Senate bill. It's on the Senate side, 181. It would allow the Indiana Attorney General to enforce Indiana's anti-sanctuary city law. Now, you supported this measure. I know it's been quite an issue across the country. Can you tell us, first of all, why you support the Attorney General having that power?
Well, when we initially passed the anti-sanctuary city legislation and anti-university, campus university laws years back, when it was passed, it allowed any citizen to bring a claim, a cause of action, to the impact of that sanctuary city law or ordinance, basically at a city level. And when it went to court a couple of years ago, the Supreme Court said the statute in and of itself is legal, but the remedy is too broad. And they thought allowing any citizen to bring a cause of action, they wouldn't be able to show harm from that ordinance necessarily at the citizen level. But the state of Indiana, in the ruling, they said that the Attorney General would be the proper person to have enforcement authority over that, because the state as a whole is represented by the Attorney General in all other civil legal actions, and they would be the proper person to have enforcement authority on the anti-sanctuary city legislation.
Right. Well, yeah, as you say, you support the measure, but is there any concern that it takes away control from local governments?
No. I mean, we every year, every session that I've been there for 16 years, there's been some action by communities that the state passes laws that clarify, where the state has jurisdiction and where local communities have jurisdiction.
And in this case, you believe it's the state?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on to another measure here. It's Senate Bill 202. It's been criticized by some educators as an attempt to control freedom of speech. It would not allow professors to express an opinion that isn't related to the subject that they teach. As of this week, it passed both chambers. Once again, what are your thoughts on that measure?
Well, it's probably the actual impact of what the bill does is 180 degrees as you described it. So what currently happens is professors can have course content that ends up, bringing in political subject matter, DEI subject matter, into courses that it has nothing to do with, and allows, and this bill would prohibit political ideology from ideological content from being brought into class content where it has no basis of the class, and this would empower boards of trustees to review and keep make sure professors aren't bringing in politically controversial subject matter into otherwise courses that don't have anything to do with politics.
You mentioned DEA, and of course that stands for diversity,
equity, inclusion.
Okay, and so you support that bill, and as I understand it now, it has it is now passed both chambers. Is that correct?
I'm pretty sure they amended it in the House Education Committee, so we'll have to have a concurrence vote on it. I don't know exactly all of the things they amended the bill, but I think structurally it still accomplishes most of its original goals.
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on to an issue here that might affect some of your constituents. House Bill 1385 addresses ambulance deserts by setting ambulance rates for out-of-network ambulances. It has passed both chambers. You represent, we mentioned all those counties that you have some jurisdiction in, rural counties, a lot of them, and you supported this bill. Can you explain how you think it will help rural areas?
Sure. So House Bill 1385 deals with ambulance rates and current insurance reimbursements many times are about 10% over the Medicare rate, Medicaid rate, which is doesn't even come close to covering the cost of ambulance service. So from the lack of proper funding, a lot of small communities can't afford to maintain ambulance service. in my particular community, we're fortunate to have Memorial Hospital provide that service. Some communities, the counties, offset some of the excess costs, but the insurance reimbursement rates that we passed in this bill, they are not a total fix. No one expects it to be a total fix, but it's part of the overall process of getting ambulance reimbursement rates
Right.
to the point where folks can afford to keep them intact in their communities. And in the budget next year, we'll have to deal with Medicaid reimbursement rates as well. And it's an overall solution of Medicaid reimbursement rates, private insurance rates, some of it being picked up and offset by local government funding. But all of those need to be worked in a mix, and this is just one piece of the puzzle that was an appropriate solution to help try to get ambulance service more supported and more available in all of our small communities.
Right. I believe Indiana Public Broadcasting reported that there are some places in the state where you may be 25 minutes away from the nearest ambulance. I'm guessing that's not acceptable. I'm guessing.
No, not at all. No, and I think they said some places the ambulance response time was hours to get someone there, and when you're dealing with a health emergency. And you don't have somebody there, pretty quickly, your odds of surviving that health challenge are pretty remote.
Yeah. All right. Well, Senator Messmer, let's move on to a House bill here. It's House Bill 1001. It's an education bill. It would expand eligibility of certain scholarships to not only children with disabilities, but siblings as well. That measure is now headed to the full Senate. Can you tell us what you know about it, what you think about it, and how you plan to vote?
Well, I hadn't actually studied that bill yet either. If it just came out of committee on Wednesday, which probably came out of Senate Education Committee, it'll get to the floor, Monday, Tuesday next week. And I'm somewhat familiar with the scholarship programs that it's referring to.
Right.
But I can't say that I know enough about it today to give you a detailed analysis of the bill.
Generally speaking, would you like to see eligibility for those scholarships expanded, or do you think it needs to stay where it is?
I really couldn't give you an accurate answer on that without having. I don't read all the bills. I don't read the bills until they get out of committee or at the committee that I work on, typically, because there's hundreds of bills to try to read, and so I'm not familiar enough with that one.
Yeah. We should point out there are always, as you say, hundreds of bills that. And only so many of them will make it through, especially this short session. Next year, of course, is the long session, the budget session, and we'll talk about that. Well, let's talk a little bit about maybe some of the bills that you have authored this session that are still alive, and where they stand, and some of the things that you find most important this General Assembly session.
Sure, happy to do that. So one of the bills that I've authored is Senate Bill 222. And it's the Auto Dealer Services Bill for the Secretary of State. The biggest component of that deals with independent auto dealers, used car salesmen, and anyone after July 1st to get their used car dealer license will have to take an education class on licensing laws, title laws, things that they normally deal with, transactions within the sale of an auto. Mm-hmm. And the hope is most complaints to the Secretary of State's office in their auto services division come from used car dealers within their first 3 years of being in business. Many times they just don't know all the details that they need to know in conducting their business properly. The legislation was written, that section of the bill training section was written by the independent auto dealers. It'll be administered by the Secretary of State. And the goal is to, eliminate complaints, eliminate mistakes by new folks in that business sector. There was a couple other pieces. One, if an independent auto dealer or any auto dealer is required to submit records to the Secretary of State's office, we had to clarify that they've got a 14-day window to respond for those record requests. Mm-hmm. And if new car dealers are issued a stop sale order by a manufacturer, currently, federal law requires them to be paid, 1% per month for the cost of just holding that vehicle in their lot and not being able to sell it. And many times, if the manufacturers delay payment, their current remedy is federal court in the state where the auto manufacturer resides, and many times that becomes impractical, for auto dealers to pursue if the pending charge is not enough to offset the attorney's fees that they're going to need to go to another state and pay expensive out of state attorneys. So we give them remedy in state court in that situation. So
as you see it, this would sort of maybe help educate the new folks in this business, folks who may not. I'm sure there's a lot of paperwork. There's a lot to be learned there, right?
Yep, absolutely. So it's a course they have to complete it. There's no pass-fail grade, but they have to show that they took the time to complete the course before they can apply for a license, and educating them along the way will definitely help. Another bill that I'm working on was Senate Bill 223. It's a construction workforce task force that would look at folks in the construction trades and what programs are available in K through 12, what programs are available at, say, Ivy Tech or other higher ed institutions. Pull together folks from all sectors of the business community to study the programs, see what can be done to incentivize young skilled workers to enter the building trades. The average construction worker in Indiana currently is 50 years old, and as those folks enter retirement age, we need to make sure we're doing all we can to look at our programs that are available to train folks and make sure they have access to get skilled in those construction trades programs, and try to incentivize young skilled men and women to enter the construction trade. So
are we looking at a shortage of
bipartisan support?
Are we looking at a shortage of construction workers? Is that what you're saying down the line?
Oh yes, they're expecting to have a severe shortage of construction workers over the next 5 to 10 years.
Let me see. And obviously, that's construction workers are a very needed profession.
Absolutely, yep. For all of our homes and industries. And another bill that I co-authored was Senate Bill 5, and that's going to make it streamline the process and make it less expensive for utility companies to replace lead service lines. There's about 280,000 households across Indiana that still have lead service lines, and lead is not good at any concentration level for the brain development of our young children. And this will help speed it up, make it less expensive, and incentivize utility companies to get those lead service lines out of use.
Yeah. All right. On another topic here, Senator Messmer, you've announced that you are running for Congress in Indiana's 8th District. Can you tell us why you made that decision?
Well, I always felt like if the opportunity were there, it'd be a step up in my public service that I would be interested in doing. When Dr. Bashan announced his retirement, the timing worked out pretty well for me. It would have been for me, now or probably never, because as another person in that office took the place of Dr. Bashan until there was another retirement that would have opened up an open seat. It would have been inopportune, I'm sure, at any too much later in life. I've done a great job at serving my House and Senate districts, the 16 years I've been at the state level, and I feel like the skills that I've developed and the effectiveness that I've had at the state level of passing a lot of times very tough and complex bills could be put to use well to try to help solve the problems out in Washington, D.C. I'm an engineer by trade and a professional engineer in practice every day, and my whole life as an adult has been spent solving problems, and that's what I've done at the General Assembly. And what I would hope to be able to do for the people of the 8th District in Washington. And
we should point out there is a pretty long list of candidates seeking that seat, as I'm sure you're aware. All right, well, Senator Messmer, we certainly appreciate you joining us this week on Lawmakers, and appreciate you chatting with us from Jasper as well. Thank you very much.
Yep, my pleasure.
Well, we return on March 8th with Lieutenant Governor Suzanne Crouch. Hope you can join us then. I'm John Gibson of WNIN FM. Thanks for watching WNIN Lawmakers.